It's after midnight in Singapore. The city is a marvel of sleek towers and neon efficiency. But down in a mostly empty hawker center, the feeling is different. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the few people still eating are like separate islands, bent over their bowls, one hand on their phone. I order a plate of chicken rice from the one uncle still chopping away and find a plastic table. Another solitary figure in this temple of speed. I start to eat. And then something happens that shouldn't feel strange, but in our world it feels almost revolutionary. An older man at the next table raises his glass of tiger beer and smiles. "You alone," he asks. "Come join us."
Yeah.
That simple invitation, the act of moving my tray and suddenly laughing with strangers like old friends, made me realize something. We live in the most connected time in history, yet we're starving for connection. What have we lost? That an act as simple as sharing a meal feels like a fundamental act of rebellion.
But that feeling that something so basic, so human, feels rebellious, that really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It captures this modern crisis perfectly.
It really does.
Because loneliness, well, it isn't just feeling sad anymore. It's being talked about now as a major global public health issue, an epidemic. You hear that word a lot, especially in parts of Europe and North America.
An epidemic? That sounds quite dramatic.
Well, the data backs it up. It's pretty alarming, actually, and it goes way beyond just, quality of life stuff. Loneliness dramatically bumps up mortality risk.
How much?
Some studies link it to about a 25% increased risk of premature death. Think about that. That puts it on par with the health risks we associate with smoking.
Wow, that's huge.
It is, and it doubles the risk for Alzheimer's, increases the chances of coronary heart disease, stroke. It seems to be this societal condition, really driven by modern life, that's literally affecting our chances of survival.
So that contradiction, that's what we're diving into today, right? We've got billions of people on social media, communication is instant, yet this deep feeling of disconnection is actually rising. It seems so widespread. So how do we focus our investigation here? Are we just talking about feeling a bit down because, your Friday night plans got canceled?
That's a great question. We definitely need to be specific. And yeah, it requires drawing a really crucial distinction between, let's say, 3 types of isolation.
Okay.
So first, you've got objective physical isolation that's pretty straightforward, just, lacking relationships or not having people physically around you.
Right, like living alone, far from family.
Exactly. Then, second, there's subjective dissatisfaction. This means you might have relationships, but you're just not happy with them. Maybe the quality isn't there, or you feel you don't have enough close friends.
Okay, that makes sense. But that feeling I described earlier, that kind of core alienation you can feel even in a packed room.
That's the third one.
That's the one. Absolutely. That's existential loneliness. And it's different. It's this deep, sometimes agonizing sense of fundamental alienation, like you just don't belong anywhere.
And it can exist completely regardless of how many connections you actually have on paper. It's like an inability to really anchor yourself to the world or to other people. It leads to this devastating feeling of rootlessness, maybe even meaninglessness.
That sounds incredibly isolating in itself.
It is. And that disconnect, this really uncomfortable pairing of feeling fundamentally alone in the universe, combined with dissatisfaction with how maybe artificial our connections can feel today. That's the core focus for us, how modern life seems to breed it, how technology tries and often fails to fix it, and maybe what some older cultural practices might offer as a more genuine antidote.
Okay, so existential loneliness, when you read about it, the descriptions feel heavy. It sounds like something that creeps up when life gets really serious, maybe when you're facing some big philosophical questions.
That's right, because at its heart, it is a philosophical experience. Existential loneliness, it's often described with this sense of disembodiment, feeling disconnected from your own life, your own body almost. And this sort of unwilling confrontation with maybe the futility of your role in the grand scheme of things. It often bubbles up when someone is forced to confront their own mortality, their own non-being.
Facing the void, so to speak.
Pretty much. And that confrontation forces this realization that fundamentally we're profoundly alone in making meaning out of our lives. Even if you're surrounded by people who love you, in the end, the universe itself, it's kind of indifferent to our personal struggles.
That sounds, devastating. Like feeling you're an imposter in your own life, questioning everything that used to give you comfort or meaning.
It definitely can feel that way. But, and this is crucial, there's this duality to it. A critical flip side that existential thinkers really emphasize.
Right.
While it's immediately painful, this experience is also seen as potentially necessary, maybe even a positive process in the long run.
How so? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, the idea is that the very pain of feeling rootless, of feeling meaningless, can act as an impetus, a push towards self-discovery. It can force you to break away from just, going along with societal norms and move towards finding a more authentic, satisfying relationship with your true self.
So the pain is like a catalyst for growth, if you let it be.
That's the idea. But then the question becomes, if that pain is supposed to force self-discovery, how does our modern world, our hyper-connected world, allow us to maybe bypass that or numb it?
Right, with distraction.
Exactly, by providing endless, immediate, but often ultimately superficial distractions. And this tension, this paradox, it's captured perfectly in digital life. We saw this illustrated really well in the story of Leo, the freelance coder.
Right, Leo. His life is basically optimized for maximum efficiency. Minimalist apartment, meals delivered, work is just this silent stream of code sent back and forth remotely.
It's frictionless. He technically has access to everyone all the time through chats and platforms.
Yes.
What is that connection actually delivering?
Not much substance, it sounds like.
Yeah. Just data, functional exchanges. Leo is almost the archetype of this digital alienation. His life is optimized into oblivion, really. Deep human interaction gets replaced by efficient information transfer.
So he's hyper-connected, but staring at his own reflection in a dark screen, feeling this profound emptiness, a kind of silent, personal apocalypse. It's loneliness created by the optimization itself.
Precisely. And this isn't just, one guy's problem. The statistics show this is a systemic thing, a symptom of the way we live now.
It's the paradox you mentioned.
It really is the defining feature. I mean, think about the scale. We had, 3.2 billion active social media users just a few years back? That's an explosion of connectivity, unprecedented.
Yeah, huge numbers.
But study after study shows this critical gap. More connectivity doesn't equal feeling more connected. Often, the time spent online seems to push out the higher quality face-to-face interactions that we actually need.
So it directly leads to more physical isolation, ironically.
It can, yeah. And maybe even more importantly, the connectivity itself. It's often just inherently dissatisfying. It fails to meet that deep need for genuine intimacy, for feeling truly seen and understood, which only makes the perceived social isolation feel even worse.
This sounds uncannily like the kind of anxiety the philosopher Kierkegaard was writing about way back in The Sickness Unto Death. He was talking about this pressure to conform, this fear of becoming our authentic selves long before the internet.
Kierkegaard's relevance today is really striking, isn't it? He argued that the despair, that sickness unto death, comes from this tension between who we are right now, our being, and the struggle to become who we could authentically be, our becoming.
And we're scared to make that leap into authenticity.
According to Kierkegaard, yes, we're too anxious. So we try to hide from that despair by just immersing ourselves completely in the present moment, in the socially acceptable world. We put on the mask, the false self.
And social media, with its constant pressure to perform, to curate the perfect image. That seems like the ultimate stage for this false self.
Oh, absolutely. It feeds directly into what some researchers call the social compensation trap.
What's that?
Studies show that people who are already lonely and then use social media specifically to try and compensate for that loneliness, they're actually more likely to end up feeling even lonelier.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, they're seeking quick validation, maybe, or a swift sense of social connection. But the platforms, by their very nature, are often designed for quantity of interaction, not necessarily quality.
Right. Likes and brief comments, not deep conversations.
Exactly. So they get caught in this really unsatisfying cycle. They need genuine connection the most, but the digital path they choose often fails to deliver that authentic interpersonal satisfaction. It just leaves them wanting more.
And it's not just the way we interact, but the content itself that traps us too, right? Through what Kierkegaard called leveling. I feel this when I scroll. You see something deeply personal or political, immediately followed by an ad, then a picture of someone's cat, then maybe a global crisis update.
Right.
The profound and the trivial, they're all just presented side by side with equal weight.
That is the perfect technological embodiment of leveling. Kierkegaard was worried about this mass consumption of information precisely because it destroys any sense of hierarchy, of what truly matters.
It flattens everything.
It does. When everything, the big global issue, the personal tragedy, the silly cat video is just presented in this linear, unprioritized stream, it just numbs you. It kind of anesthetizes us. into being passive spectators of life rather than active participants.
And that passivity is crucial.
It seems to be. Research backs this up. Passive consumption of social media, like, say, just mindlessly scrolling through videos, which is how a huge chunk of YouTube users engage, that correlates pretty strongly with lower well-being and increased loneliness.
So if you're just passively absorbing all that noise, you're essentially fulfilling Kierkegaard's fear, numbing yourself into the despair of not being your authentic self.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. The opposite, then, would be active engagement.
Right.
Things like actually making new friends online or having meaningful one-to-one message exchanges that can help alleviate isolation. But it's the massive passive immersion in the collective noise that reminds me of another philosopher, Heidegger, and his concept of fallenness.
Okay, Heidegger. We saw mention of something called Das Man in the sources. Can you unpack what the they means, especially in this context of digital conformity?
Sure. Das Man, translated as the they, or sometimes the one, represents the collective voice. It's that nameless, faceless authority that sort of dictates how one should think, how one feels, what one does.
It's like keeping up with the Joneses, but on a massive societal scale.
Exactly. Heidegger described the inauthentic way of living as fallenness, this mindless immersion in the everyday world of Das Man. And the appeal is that this collective they relieves the individual of the terrifying burden of their own freedom, their own choices.
It's easier to just go with the flow.
It tranquilizes us, as Heidegger put it, from the anxiety of having to face our own existence, our own being.
But surely some level of conforming, of collective behavior, is necessary for society to even function? Where's the line between just, healthy social norms and this negative fallenness?
That's a key question. The line, according to Heidegger and thinkers influenced by him, seems to be crossed when our relationships and interactions become purely functional. And this is precisely what modern technology often promotes through what he called inframing.
Inframing, what does that mean?
Inframing is a way of seeing the world and everything in it primarily as a resource to be ordered, controlled, and used. It reduces things and people to objects of utility and convenience.
Okay, I think I see where this is going with social media.
Right. On these platforms, our entire relational world often gets structured around quantifiable metrics. How many likes, how many views, how many shares. This reduces communication and connection itself to a framework of usefulness.
So when my connectivity, my relationships, are measured mainly by these quantifiable responses, it starts to turn the relationship itself into a commodity, not just the content I share.
That's the risk.
Yeah.
If I start valuing my connections primarily for the likes they give me or the engagement they provide for my brand, they become functional objects in my world.
And if they're just functional objects.
Exactly. This leads straight to this frightening concept of the consumable self, which Sherry Turkle has written about extensively. When we reduce others to functional roles using a friend just to boost our ego or network for a job or get validation, we inevitably risk starting to see ourselves the same way. Our own value becomes tied directly to our function, our usefulness, our convenience to others.
And if your function is no longer needed,
you become disposable. And that moment, that realization of being non-functional, of being useless to the collective they, is when that acute existential loneliness can hit hardest. That sense of being utterly rootless, disconnected, and insignificant. We see this expressed so often, for instance, in studies with elderly individuals reporting existential loneliness. They frequently talk about feeling useless, no longer relevant, alienated from a society obsessed with speed and utility.
Okay, so the messiness and, frankly, the vulnerability required for real-world connection. It's clearly a lot for people to handle in this kind of hyper-anxious world we've described.
Yeah, it demands a lot.
So it makes perfect sense that people would turn towards the digital realm for some kind of relief.
Yeah.
A place where maybe connection feels more controlled, predictable, maybe even non-judgmental. We saw this dynamic play out in the story of Ethan, the young man dealing with significant social anxiety, and his relationship with Nova, his AI companion.
Ethan's situation really highlights the massive appeal of what some sources are calling touchless ecstasy.
Touchless ecstasy. Interesting term.
Sure. Isn't it? For someone like Ethan, who's struggling intensely with social situations, finding a deep emotional connection with an AI, something that feels non-judgmental, always available, perfectly safe in this controlled virtual space, well, it can feel like a powerful lifeline.
I can see that.
It allows people who feel isolated to almost rehearse intimacy, express deep feelings, gain comfort, all without the overwhelming unpredictability and, let's face it, the risk of human rejection. It's undeniably serving as a crucial coping mechanism for many.
Yeah, the big question hangs there, doesn't it? Is this comfort actually helping people grow and eventually engage with the real world? Or is it maybe just creating a more comfortable, perhaps even a more beautiful cage?
That is the absolute core ethical dilemma we're facing here. And as loneliness rates continue to climb, the market demand for these kinds of controlled technological solutions is just skyrocketing. It's driving this rapid rise of really sophisticated haptic technologies.
Haptic tech meaning tech involving touch or sensation.
Exactly. The market is basically racing to provide digital replacements or supplements for physical intimacy and connection.
So what are these haptic platforms actually doing? How are they trying to mimic that sense of physical presence, of touch?
Well, you've got a range. There's teledildonics, which are networked sex toys like Kiru or WeVibe. Then there are devices designed for maybe less overtly sexual but still intimate communication, things like the Kissinger, which tries to transmit a kiss, or even certain features in wearables like the Apple Watch's heartbeat sharing or the Hey bracelet that sends a little squeeze.
And how are they marketed?
They're very explicitly marketed as ways to close the distance. You see that phrase a lot. They emphasize mutual connection. Kiru, for instance, advertises couple sets specifically designed to ease the distance.
So they're trying to simulate that skin-to-skin feeling, but obviously it can't be the same. What's the fundamental difference, not just technically, but experientially, between this kind of digital touch and actual physical touch?
Well, if you look at it from a phenomenological perspective, studying the lived experience, the difference is profound. Real traditional touch is immediate, it's ambiguous, it involves both passively being touched and actively sensing that touch, with all the nuance that entails.
Nice. It's complex.
Very. Digital touch, however, is always fundamentally mediated by the technology. The experience gets shaped and limited by the tech itself. You're dealing with things like latency delays, bandwidth limitations. The sensory feedback is restricted. You don't get the ambient warmth, the subtle shifts in pressure, the scent, the context.
So instead of tuning directly into the other person, their actual physical presence, I'm actually tuning into the machine.
In a crucial way, yes. You have to attune to the technology first, and then to how the other person is being remediated, that is, filtered, translated, reshaped across the distance, according to whatever the device is capable of simulating.
And the intimacy itself is shaped by the tech.
Precisely. It's fundamentally co-created by the device. The technology becomes an essential co-actor in the experience, shifting the focus subtly but significantly from the human body itself to the hardware and software interface.
And okay, every time one of these digital touches happens, whether it's a simple heartbeat tap on a watch or something more involved, that signal, that data, is passing through this incredibly complex, mostly invisible network, servers, platforms, maybe even satellites. What seems intensely private actually involves what the sources called unknowable partners.
That's exactly right. And that immediately throws open this huge ethical question around data, because platform capitalism, as we know, runs on data.
And haptic technologies must collect incredibly sensitive data.
Extremely sensitive. We're talking about metadata on the most intimate practices, desires, possibly even things like body temperature fluctuations, heart rate during intimate moments. This isn't just personal data. It's the fuel for what's being called data-driven intimacy.
Data-driven intimacy. Why is this specific kind of intimacy data so valuable to these platforms?
Well, think about it. Behavioral data about our deepest desires, our physical responses during intimacy, it allows companies to potentially predict our intimate needs and monetize our future interactions.
Wow.
This data feeds incredibly personalized recommendation systems, not just for products, but maybe for future companionship models, relationship advice platforms, therapeutic tools. Knowing your heart rate patterns during intimate moments, for example, that's extremely valuable for understanding and maybe directing your future spending related to well-being, relationships, even leisure activities.
The potential for misuse feels enormous.
Yeah.
The WeVibe lawsuit seems like a stark warning here.
That case was a landmark. Standard Innovation, the company behind the WeVibe sex toy, ended up settling a $5 million class action lawsuit. Why? Because they were found to be secretly collecting user data specifically, when and how the device was used, even its temperature, without getting proper informed consent.
So people thought they were having a private experience.
And they were unknowingly participating in a large-scale data harvesting operation. It was a huge wake-up call. It hammered home that intimacy data needs the absolute highest level of sensitivity, security, and transparent consent.
Consent is already complex enough in the physical world. But when technology mediates it, the boundaries seem to get incredibly blurry, especially when we think about Harm that isn't overtly sexual, but still violating.
That's a critical point. The psychological impact of harm in virtual spaces can be just as acute, sometimes even more confusing.
Like the story of Jordan Bellemire in that VR game.
Exactly. She described being virtually groped by another player's avatar in the game QuiVR. And her account was chilling because she said the virtual attack felt just as real, just as violating as a physical one would have.
Because the immersion is so total.
The psychological immersion in well-designed VR is incredibly high. The sense of presence, of being there, means that a boundary violation can feel immediate, personal, and terrifying. This really forces us to have urgent conversations about what consent looks like, how we establish boundaries in these emerging digital spaces.
And beyond violations within a game, if these digital touch devices become commonplace, there's also the potential for them to be used to extend control or abuse across distances, right?
Absolutely. That's a serious concern. Imagine an abusive or controlling partner having the ability to incessantly send unwanted, harassing touches through a device like an Apple Watch, maybe even using the data collected as a form of surveillance.
So preventing this kind of harm can't just be an afterthought. It has to be built into the design.
It absolutely has to be. It requires integrating what some call a feminist ethics of consent right into the design process from the very beginning.
And what does that look like, practically speaking?
Yeah.
How do you design for consent in a technological setting beyond just a checkbox?
Well, it means thinking beyond simple verbal or explicit yes-no consent, which can feel awkward or pressured. It could involve designing interfaces that facilitate a more mutual, ongoing creation of consent.
Like what?
Maybe things like having an immediate, universally accessible panic or auto-disconnect button, offering highly personalized settings that let users strictly define who can touch them, when, and how, perhaps incorporating nonverbal digital cues for affirmation or withdrawal of consent. The goal is to ensure the technology itself empowers users and doesn't inadvertently become a tool for extending real-world patterns of abuse into the digital realm without providing adequate technological defenses.
Okay, so if the root problem we're exploring is this deep existential alienation, and the digital response, while maybe offering some comfort, carries these risks of becoming a beautiful cage,
Yeah.
then maybe the truly authentic solution lies back in the physical world, the slow world.
That seems to be the argument, yeah.
Which brings us back full circle, almost, to that simple invitation in the Singapore Hawker Center. And to this broader idea, we encountered the counter-narrative of the Mediterranean rebel.
Yes, Mediterranean rebel. It offers this powerful, philosophical, but also very practical counterpoint to the relentless hustle culture that arguably created Leo's alienation in the first place.
How so?
It's a mindset, a way of life that consciously prioritizes, well, you could call it soul, the richness of human life, genuine connection, savoring moments, prioritizing that over the constant demands for speed, efficiency, and optimization that tend to dominate modern Western life.
The story of Sarah, the American executive who moved to that small Italian village, really seemed to capture this clash of values. She was initially driven crazy by the slow pace, right? The shops closing midday, the seeming lack of urgency.
Absolutely. It was completely counter to her highly optimized, scheduled life back home. But her turning point, the moment of realization, came when her landlady, Elena, basically practically dragged her away from her laptop and insisted she join this long, loud, wonderfully messy communal dinner. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and food and connection, Sarah had this epiphany that the relentless efficiency she'd worshipped felt like a really poor, deeply unsatisfying substitute for the genuine sense of belonging she felt right there at that table.
And that transformative act, sitting down together, that's what the sources call commensality.
That's the term, commensality, literally eating together. It sounds so simple, doesn't it?
It does.
But anthropological sources suggest it's far more profound than just, sharing calories. Commensality comes from the Latin mensa, meaning table. So it's about living together at the table.
Oh, okay.
It's seen as this really multi-dimensional, intricate way we communicate expressively, a fundamental cornerstone of social cohesion that goes way back in human evolution. Preparing and eating food together was essential for early human groups, for safety, for forging alliances, for establishing social bonds and hierarchies. It's deeply ritualistic, far beyond just nutrition.
And within that practice of eating together, we find conviviality. What's the distinction there?
Conviviality is more about the feeling, the emotional quality of eating together. It's the pleasure, the enjoyment, the social interaction that happens around the meal, often governed more by social rules and enjoyment than by strict time limits.
Like lingering after dinner, just talking.
Exactly. It's an often overlooked but absolutely crucial feature of genuinely healthy dietary patterns. You see this particularly emphasized in the traditional Mediterranean diet. It's not just about the olive oil and vegetables, it's about the enjoyment, the social aspect, the slowness. It's really the antithesis of these rigid, deprivation-focused diet cultures we often see today.
Does this cultural practice, just prioritizing sitting down, enjoying time together over a meal, does it actually have a measurable impact on our physical health?
Oh, an enormous impact. It's quite staggering when you look at the research. Fostering strong social connections through practices like regular conviviality is associated with something like a 50% increased odds of survival.
Wait, 50%? Just from essentially having dinner with people?
It sounds incredible, but that's what large-scale studies suggest. This lifestyle also significantly reduces the risk for major killers, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and, maybe unsurprisingly, it dramatically lowers the risk for depression and anxiety.
A 50% survival benefit is.
Duh.
That's astonishing. What's happening biochemically? How does sharing a meal translate to such profound health outcomes?
Well, conviviality seems to work directly on our neurochemical balance. Shared eating experiences are shown to reduce stress. They lower levels of cortisol, the main stress hormone.
Okay.
And maybe even more importantly, it boosts mood and promotes strong social bonding. It's believed to trigger the release of neurohormones like oxytocin, sometimes called the cuddle hormone, and also engage the brain's endorphin system, creating feelings of pleasure and well-being.
So it feels good, chemically.
Yes, and this positive physiological state might actively counteract some of the negative anatomical consequences linked to chronic loneliness. Things like adverse structural changes observed in the brain, such as a smaller hippocampus or amygdala in chronically lonely individuals. Plus, there's a simpler behavioral aspect. People eating together often make healthier food choices, more fruits, vegetables, fewer processed foods compared to eating alone quickly.
And this cultural practice, this learning how to connect over food, it starts really early, right?
Yeah.
In the most basic social unit, the family.
Absolutely. The family is the primary, the fundamental commensal unit. And the research on the impact of regular family meals is incredibly compelling.
Was so.
Children and adolescents who regularly eat meals with their families, they're less likely to be obese, they tend to have better academic performance, and they show significantly lower rates of depressive symptoms and anxiety. It highlights how crucial mealtimes are as these formative learning environments, places for bonding, for communication practice, for transmitting cultural values in a way that, say, passively watching TV together simply cannot replicate.
This whole emphasis on the slow, shared, maybe even mundane moment, it feels like the perfect antidote to those purely functional I-it relationships that digital life can sometimes encourage. It really reminds me of the philosopher Martin Buber.
It aligns perfectly with Buber's philosophy, doesn't it? He
Right.
made that crucial distinction between the I-it relation, where we see and treat the other person essentially as an object for our use, functional, predictable, maybe even consumable, and the I-thou relation. That's the realm of genuine connection. The I-thou encounter requires two people to meet with their whole selves in this honest, mutual, present union. And communal dining, well, it provides almost the ideal fertile ground for that kind of I-thou encounter. It's inherently non-functional in Buber's sense.
Because when we meet someone in a purely functional I-it way, we keep a part of ourselves separate, right? We only engage with the parts of them that are useful to us at that moment.
Exactly.
But sharing a table, especially a long, messy meal like Sarah experienced, it kind of forces you to encounter the whole person. The messy bits, the boring bits, the funny bits.
It does. And interestingly, this cultural focus on shared meals also elevates the value of the seemingly mundane, the everyday, maybe even trivial aspects of life that someone like Kierkegaard might have dismissed as a distraction from the big questions.
How so?
Well, some social psychology research suggests that we actually grow closer to our friends not just through deep conversations, but by quietly taking in the mundane details of another's life. Authentic bonding doesn't always need high drama or constant profundity. It often happens in those simple, repeated, shared moments of everyday existence, like, just passing the salt across the table.
Yeah.
It affirms that these seemingly small, shared moments are actually essential building blocks for social bonding and creating that sense of belonging.
Okay, so if we accept that this kind of commensality, this shared presence, is vital, but we also live in a world where physical proximity just isn't always possible. People move, families are spread out. Can technology play a positive role here? Can it act as a bridge rather than just being part of the problem or a cage?
That's a really important question for our times. And the answer seems to be yes, it absolutely can. The very necessity of maintaining connection across distance has driven the rise of what's being called digital commensality.
Digital commensality, like having dinner over Zoom.
Exactly. Things like virtual meals, online cooking classes together, even share food blogging experiences. These things are successfully helping people transcend geographical barriers to share food experiences.
But does it feel the same? Is it as good as being there?
Well, perhaps predictably, studies show that almost everyone prefers physical commensality. Being in the same room is ideal. However, the data also confirms that digital commensality is significantly better than just eating alone.
Significantly better. How much better?
Remarkably, one study that directly compared people eating together physically versus eating together digitally via video link found virtually no significant difference in their reported overall meal enjoyment.
Really? No difference in enjoyment.
Basically none, which is a critical insight, I think. It confirms that the ritual of sharing a meal, the intention, the social connection, even when it's mediated by a screen, can successfully foster that sense of social connectedness and community when being physically together just isn't an option. It can be a vital support mechanism for well-being and for reducing that feeling of social isolation across distance. #tag outro.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive has really navigated this core tension, hasn't it? Between, on one hand, this almost existential anxiety that comes with striving for authentic individuality, and on the other, this absolute fundamental human imperative for deep shared connection. We've seen how digital life, often designed with efficiency as the highest goal, can paradoxically create its own unique forms of alienation. By commodifying our relationships, maybe, and allowing us to sort of sidestep that necessary, if sometimes uncomfortable, self-confrontation.
Yeah, the modern challenge seems to demand real mindfulness from us, not just about how we optimize our digital tools, but about prioritizing the actual quality and maybe the wholeness of our interactions, whether they're online or offline.
So it's not about ditching technology entirely.
Not necessarily. It's perhaps about approaching technology with what some thinkers call an unconcerned releasement, using it consciously as a tool when it's needed, but actively ensuring we're not completely swallowed up by its underlying logic, that functional and framing way of seeing the world and each other. It means consciously choosing to resist sometimes the relentless demands for speed and functional utility that modern life often imposes.
It comes back to that idea of rebellion, doesn't it? The real act of rebellion against all the noise and the hyper-efficiency might just be choosing presence. Choosing the slow, maybe messy, possibly loud shared meal over the solitary, perfectly optimized protein bar consumed while working.
Beautifully put, because it's right there in those seemingly trivial shared human moments, perhaps around a table, that we might actually find that deep sense of belonging. The feeling that reminds us we aren't just functional objects or nodes in a network, but fundamentally human beings who belong to each other.